to another video. Purple Political Talk here. Today is Wednesday, May 22nd, 2024. And today we're going to be taking a look at the electoral map and discussing what are Joe Biden's best case scenarios in the 2024 election. And we're going to do this a bit differently, right? We're going to take a look at, Joe Biden's kind of pathway to victory first, and then how that could develop into, a bigger electoral count, depending on how well things are for him. Now, let me preface this by saying, this is not my prediction. If you haven't seen my actual electoral prediction, I recommend you go back in the channel and check it out. But and number two, I don't think this is going to happen. I think that, Joe Biden faces so many obstacles as an incumbent president that I don't see him winning with a landslide victory. He might be able to win through a very tight electoral college victory, but by no means do I think it's going to be a landslide. However, I think it's always interesting to look at the varying degrees of success that a presidential candidate could have, considering a lot of different factors, considering, normal conditions of probably what is going to happen, all the way to what if, the country sort of turned upside down and, things went really well for Biden. And I plan on making the same video for Donald Trump in the coming weeks. But yeah, so before we get started with the actual video, I want to remind you guys to like, subscribe, and to turn on the notification bell so you're up to date with all our latest content about the 2024 election. So let's begin. So what you're looking at right now is the 7 states that fundamentally I think are the swing states for this election. In a moderate case scenario for Biden where he wins the election, I think that, you're probably looking at him winning somewhere in Arizona, something like Arizona. You look at him winning somewhere like Michigan. You see him winning in probably somewhere like Pennsylvania. And look, that's his pathway to victory. That's all he really needs to win the White House. Pick any 2 Rust Belt states and pick one of the Sun Belt states, North Carolina, Georgia, or Arizona. Biden wins the election, right? So, I think the possibilities for Biden winning and, most of the electoral probabilities are going to be centered in this general field. Pick any 2 Rust Belt states, and in some cases, for example, if Trump carries Pennsylvania and, he would have to carry another one. So he would have to carry Georgia, for example, right? So, in a moderate scenario, I think that's where we're looking at. A Biden victory, that's a small one, a couple of states up in the Midwest, and then, maybe 1 or 2 states down in the Sun Belt. Now, let's talk about what a good night for Joe Biden will look like. I mean, by no means necessarily a quote-unquote landslide, but what does a good night look for Joe Biden in this election? I think in 2020, what would a good night? I think that if this happened, Biden and the Democrats would be, ecstatic for what they've been able to accomplish. So I think a really good night for the Democrats would be carrying the entire Rust Belt. So Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, because not only that basically guarantees them winning the election, just with that you hit 270 electoral votes, considering you give, the electoral vote in Nebraska and the electoral vote in Maine to the respective parties. So you would see that. And then in a good night, I think Joe Biden would win, Nevada, and he would probably carry a state like Arizona. Again, keep in mind, this is my best, varying cases for Biden. A good night for Biden will look something like that. Maybe he loses Georgia, and North Carolina, for example, right? So something like this would be a good night for Joe Biden. He had pretty strong success in the Midwest. You did lose a little bit of, support. The Republicans were able to flip maybe 1 or 2 states from the 2020 election. But, overall, I think that a good night for the Biden campaign would be being able to hold on in a lot of the states. And if, for example, if the election was held today, you were looking at, states where something like this would be pretty astonishing in the sense that, Biden is behind in the polls in every single one of these states. So that would be a good night for Biden. And I think a lot of things needs to go right for Biden for things to end up like here, or, and you can do the reverse of that. Some things may need to go wrong for Trump for, Joe Biden to arrive in this sort of like good electoral scenario. if you're starting to get into what a realistic, absolute best case scenario for Biden would look like, and please don't mind, I'm not gonna really play around with the tilts and stuff and the likely column states, because when you're really talking about a best case scenario, you're looking at just states he would carry, right? So there are some states that, for example, you could say, well, South Carolina in an absolute best case scenario might go from safe to likely. But I want you to think about that in your head. But what are states that could actually be carried in absolute best case scenarios? In an absolute realistic best case scenario, and I don't think we've reached landslide yet. I mean, it depends who you ask. 319 electoral votes. Biden carries every single state that he carried back in 2016, plus the state of North Carolina. This is, I would say, realistically, as far as Biden will probably end up getting in the Electoral College. Again, this is assuming, the night goes not only phenomenal for Biden, but absolutely phenomenal, right? And you see, when it comes to the order of things flipping, I think on a good night, he kind of wins the Rust Belt. Then as he starts expanding on having a better night, he expands down in the Sun Belt. So something like this, I think the Democrats, they would have clearly had an amazing night. They likely, maybe could have had 50-50 control in the Senate, and then they probably would have won the House if something like this happens. Again, I don't think it's very likely, but if it were to happen, I think, it would be interesting, an interesting perspective. Now, what are the states that I think that Joe Biden could win in an absolute best case scenario? I'm saying here something very unfathomable happened, something really not politically, not in our current political matrix per se. What are states that, if things absolutely went phenomenal for Joe Biden to the point where, he just becomes the most popular president in American history by the time the election happens, something to that ridiculous of an extent. What are the states that realistically I think Biden could win? Well, I think states like Texas, right, would probably fall on that column, right? In an absolute best case scenario for Joe Biden. And you're really looking at it through the perspective of, Republicans in Texas, they've lost a little bit of ground, right? And Democrats are certainly within a somewhat of a striking distance. It's still a lot. It's around 8 points, but, Georgia was like that at some point. And yes, they're not the same situation, but in a situation where Biden is massively overperforming and, you have a landslide, quote unquote, environment, I think Texas goes. Adding to that list is the state of Florida. Again, I don't really see Biden winning in Florida. I don't see really Biden winning in Texas. But in the absolute best case scenario, I think he can, pull off a victory in Florida, and that would add more votes to his electoral count. The final state is the state of Ohio. I think in an absolute best case scenario, Biden definitely and this would be getting into the plane of almost the unrealistic. Biden wins the state of Ohio. Something like this, I would say, is Joe Biden's absolute best case scenario map. And this would be landslide territory. This would be, a cross-generational impact, that Biden has been able to have. It would be something that these type of political landslides that would happen sort of once in a lifetime. And again, that is very unlikely. If we go back, if we compare this map, 406 electoral votes, to what I think sort of could be the electoral map at this point in the race, we're looking at something probably like this, where the Republicans, they do strong in a lot of states, where the election could look something like this, or perhaps maybe, Wisconsin could go to Biden, but, something like this. There's so many different possibilities of what the electoral map might actually look like. And, frankly, to be honest, I think that this election cycle is not going to be one of those election cycles where we see a landslide victory. I think if we were to run simulations of this election, it would be very unlikely because of how tight the polls are in so many states. If you were to look at Biden's really realistic best case scenario, it would be winning all the swing states, right? Any campaign would be thrilled to do that. And if you were to use that logic, then again, you get to 319 electoral votes, which both when Biden and when Trump won, both parties claimed that, 306 electoral votes is a landslide. In my opinion, it's not. In my opinion, a landslide scenario really is above 330 electoral votes. And I think we won't be seeing that at all. So yeah, I mean, I think this is a very interesting thing to discuss. I think that this is very unlikely. I think that Biden um, probably will not be able to even pull off something like this, which is a realistic best case scenario, let alone something like that scenario I spoke of where he wins like Texas, Florida, and Ohio. But it's always interesting to look at the election through this different perspective and think about what the kind of absolute best each of the candidates can do. But I want to hear what you think. I want to hear what you think down in the comments. Do you think Joe Biden could win in a landslide if all the conditions were right? Or do you think that Donald Trump would have enough support to not let this happen? I think this is a very interesting conversation. I already know the comments are going to be, pretty heated. Because again, this is not my prediction. It's just a what if. What if Biden did exceptionally well? But I will be making one of these videos for Donald Trump real soon. So make sure you guys are liked, subscribed, and to turn on your notification bell so you're like up to date when that video comes out. And yeah, so again, let me know what you think down in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching, and goodbye.